Good morning and welcome along to this hearings committee, which is for deliberations on the Sandy Point Domain Management Plan. There are no apologies. Councillor Dermody is attending on Zoom. Also a note that while Councillor Stewart is with us this morning, he wasn't here for the submissions and hasn't had a chance to catch up with the video, and so we'll be sitting at the table but not participating in deliberations. Alex?
Thank you, Chair. You'll note in the minutes that I was an apology to the first part of the meeting. I can confirm I have read all of the submissions and have watched the recount of the live stream.
Great.
So I can participate in deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other declarations of interest? You've all had a...
Sorry, Chair.
Yep, you need to leave by 12:15.
Oh, yeah, no, but I've just got one of the written submissions is from Active South, my employer. And
Did you take part in that formation of the submission?
as he, yeah.
Were you part of writing the submission?
No.
That's fine.
Okay, cool.
Any others? Actually, the submission was probably written before you were working for them anyway, if memory serves. Right, just as a matter of process, there's a clarification that I'll get from Mr. Capel before we get into minutes and deliberations. And one was, that's around Coopers Creek. There were obviously quite a few submissions around that. Can you just remind us of the process that Council went through last year and the relevance to the management plan? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So they, and I have met with a couple of Coopers Creek residents since the submissions last week, again also to provide them with some clarity around process and around what the purpose of this reserve management plan process is and how we got to where we've got to. But to recall, you'll appreciate we worked through quite a few months of last year alongside the 17 licence holders with Councillor Campbell and myself to meet individually at the request of the Council to come to some sort of, try and get to some sort of agreement around what may be an appropriate resolution that satisfies both Council and licence holders. And at its September, Friday 27th September 2024 meeting, Council resolved to approve an approach for future 10-year agreement at Coopers Creek to be included in the draft Sandy Point Domain Management Plan, building section specifically 9.3.2.11, which was decided on the day to be a 21-year licence to occupy with a right to renewal of 7 years plus 7 years, with the right to transfer to a third party for the remaining period to a maximum of 35 years. That is the decision that Council made in September last year. That is what is in the reserve management plan that you decided to include in the reserve management plan, which is what's in it, which is now what is being decided going forward from here. The other resolution that Council made on that day was that it resolved that it did not support any changes to the current recreation reserve status that impacts the Coopers Creek village. So it was basically saying that it was wanting to keep the current recreation reserve status as it was for that. So I think the critical thing for this deliberations meeting today, and when whatever goes through to the Community Wellbeing and Regulatory Committee in May and then on to Council, is that what is in the plan was a decision that Council made in September last year, and that has been subsequently put in by staff.
So that process isn't really up for debate. That's just incorporating a previous decision by Council.
Correct.
Unless you go back and start the whole process again.
And thank you. Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Unless we were to have it requested by either through this deliberations process to Community Wellbeing Regulatory Committee and then on to Council, that it re-litigate and restart that process again because you wanted to rescind your decision, or the Council's decision, on the 27th of September last year.
But still, that decision would rest with council as
Correct.
to whether it wanted to. Thanks, Rex, appreciate that. So first point is receiving the minutes from the hearing, so I'll do that first. Moved Leslie, seconded Pania. Put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. Now the deliberations, and I know that some of you have been through and made notes, so I don't mind jumping around all over the place. I'll take it that you've read the summary of deliberations. So are there any questions that you wish to raise as part of that? Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few comments. I'm not sure whether they're questions or not. I don't know if they're relevant, but I'd like to highlight some things that I thought stood out across a lot of the submissions. One's to do with signage. Obviously, I think we need to look at what signage is there, but I would encourage the team to consider having defined signage. So, like, what would be the main piece of work for that area? For example, say the dog park. So it was mainly for dog park, but it didn't exclude other people. So that if people chose to go there and go running and got irritated by the dogs, then that was just the way it is, because it was basically for the dogs. So I'm not sure what other people think, but I thought a specific signage for the parks. And again, with the horse riding, they've asked for signage for clarity, but I think it needs to be considered that it could be used for other things, but the priority might be for signage. So those are just my thoughts.
So just, good point. So while we're on signage, I guess something that we need to keep in mind, and this goes back to a submission that we received through a previous process, is that we need to keep signage uncomplicated.
Yes.
Because, and also relevant for those with different learning abilities. And that's, you know, I'll use an example of a cigarette with a red circle and a stripe across it. People know what that means, and so making use of graphics sometimes with a minimum of text to clarify. I think we also need to bear in mind that realistically people don't always see signs. But I think if we've put them there, it gives others the chance to come and say, actually, did you realise that this was...
Yeah, that seemed to be a message that was coming through, I think, from the feedback.
Yep.
I've got some other things. Do you want me to go through them?
Away you go.
Okay. I did like the idea of the significant tussock area. I don't know whether that's possible or whether that can be developed, but it did seem to me that this is an area that is of special interest for lots of people, and if there was the ability to do that without huge cost, I would really encourage that. That was the from Jordan Trail, his submission, talking about the specific red tussock.
Cassie, can I ask, is there adequate provision under biodiversity to recognise the significance of the red tussock at Sandy Point?
Yes, we would be looking at that, and also looking at speaking with Jordan a little bit more around to how that could look. So before we start putting anything down on paper. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And the other, I've got just a few things I've got here, but the other one of note. Thanks for clarifying the piece about the Cooper's Creek. That was great. Thank you, Rex. The warden and the upkeep of the land. I mean, we all know that if you put a lot of effort into a place, it takes a lot more cost. And to me, Sandy Point, particularly the area this is my opinion, particularly the area around the old golf course, the wildness of sometimes is the attraction as a part to being totally mown. But I wonder, I'd like us to think about how we could monitor some kind of ranger or volunteer ranger. I thought that had real merit, and I don't know how practical it is, but I'd like us to have a look at that.
So that's probably something council can look at through its annual plan process. 'Cause it's real a change in that area, but
Yep.
just while we're on that, Councillor Soper, I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ludlow. I was just going to emphasise that I think the whole question of whether we reinstate a ranger or in some way supervise a voluntary ranger scheme at Sandy Point is something that I would like to see included and perhaps given a little bit more emphasis, as I think it's been seriously raised as an ongoing issue, and I think we need to continue to monitor what we've been advised has been an increase in not particularly great behaviour at Sandy Point since the permanent ranger position was disestablished.
Pania?
Mr Chair, yeah, just on that same matter around the ranger type concept, I mean, I just sort of look at that in parallel to Māori wardens and how we developed up that type of grouping. I mean, as volunteers and that it could be a concept that could be discussed further and explored. Because there's something definitely needed out there because it came through quite strongly.
Yeah. Good point. And as co-chair of the Wardens, I can tell you there's an
I know.
accreditation process that everybody needs to go through. So it means that not anybody can
No,
declare
that's right.
themselves to be a voluntary warden, and we've got comfort around the people that are approaching others. On the same thing, Ria?
Yes.
Please.
Yes, it was. I totally was going to mention that too, Mr Chair. I think that what Councillor Soper says is indeed important. A lot of the submitters felt very, very strong about there being someone present that could oversee, monitor the area of concerns. What I couldn't quite click into place is what powers do these people have, and are they able to be enforced?
So that's something we'll go through in a separate process.
Yeah.
Yep. Grant, I've got a note that I'll come to you when I'm finished with Trish going through her list. So if you want to take your hand down, and if there's anything on a sidebar that you want to chip in, put your hand up at that point so I recognise that. Trish.
Thank you. And my last point is to do with the rest area by the, I think it's the, where people can go and have a picnic. It's the area that's closed off at times.
At the former water ski club?
Yes,
Yes.
that's where it is, yeah. It seems that, like we are really encouraging people to use this area, and people do. I've done a wee bit of research with the people who use it often, and there are numerous different groups of people out there. I think if people were going out there and wanting to have a picnic or something, and I haven't seen this, so I'm not sure, but it's just what's come through, I'd like it to be accessible and reasonably maintained, if we could.
I think, because I'm aware of what's been happening, there have been issues with vandalism from some of the that some of the user groups out there have experienced, and I think particularly Wakaama. But I think it's worth looking into more, but also acknowledging that that's not the only place that people can have a picnic.
No,
Absolutely.
no, that's right. That's all, thank you.
Thanks. Ria?
And just on that same note that Councillor Ball was brought up, I understand that the Wakaama premise have keys that can be requested to enter around the area. I do believe that families should be able to have access, especially the picnic area, and I'm just wondering if there couldn't be a better system worked out for access.
Take a note of that. Thank you. Grant?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just on the deliberations, just a couple of points of clarification around the summary. So on page 4, and key points expressed as noted in the submission, I missed the significance of the Silver Lagoon as a unique wetland ecosystem. Was that raised? That wasn't raised by the submitters on the day. I didn't see it or couldn't see it in the submissions. Is it in the submissions? Can someone confirm that is actually in the submission?
Cassie?
Environment Southland.
I did read that to some extent. Yeah, that it was a significant ecosystem.
Okay,
Submitted
who
39.
was the submitter that raised that?
Jordan Trail, I think it was 39.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also ES.
Did he specifically, so he presented, but did he specifically raise that issue on the day, or did he leave that out?
Caroline?
Councillor Dermody, it's in his written submission.
Right, okay, sorry. Then the second one, further down on that, integrated management of opportunities across multiple agencies. I'd take that as sort of a, how we're going to manage this. Is that, am I right in summarising that?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
That's not me, Grant, that's me looking at staff who are nodding.
Yeah, no, all good. And then just on the next page, page 5, the last paragraph before next steps, so other general responses raised, mention the high volume waterways, etc. I would say, and I did raise that on the day, if you look at the numbers, there's significantly more bikers than horse riders on actual numbers. So, what I took from that statement is, there's the horse rider numbers are more significant than any other user group. My view would be, but we'd possibly need to confirm that the bikers would be significantly more, and probably walkers, than the horses, just as points. Do you want my sort of summary of sort of things now, Darren, or do you want me?
There you go.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So look, I've split it into sort of 6 key themes. So I think we need to look at shared versus exclusive spaces for the different user groups, and obviously mountain biking, horses, dogs and walkers being those primary user groups, noting there'll be other users as well, and get them to determine their priorities for use as part of developing up how it will be used, so we've got real user engagement in that process. I think fire risk, that was raised, and so I think we need to have a really clear plan with the fire service around how that would be managed if it was those water areas that are located around, so that the monsoon buckets can be dipped in, or what the plan is. I think that's really, really important given climate adaptation and change and all those sorts of things. Safety and security, it's been raised about the ranger, but I think we need to look at what is the best options here. Is it extension of CCTV? Is it and a note, I think Ria raised the point around what are the powers of a ranger, and equally what Pani has raised around it's similar to a Maori warden, where they've got a presence which is powerful, no doubt, but their ability to enforce anything is limited, and they need that backup from the enforcement agency. So I think we need a really good, clear plan around that. User group committee came through really strongly from my perspective, and I think what we should do in the master plan is define the scope and role of a user group, so it's very clear not only how we form that user group, but what their scope is in terms of how they would interact with council to manage the resource. And then how best to manage bio and ecodiversity, and so included in that lots of the tussocks, but equally weed and pest. I think that's really, really important. And what I noted from the submissions was a lot of focus on the south side of Duns Road. There wasn't a lot of focus on the Fossbender Park piece. My view is that's included in this. Are staff nodding that it is, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you just, I do use that a bit, and there is, a lot of developing gorse and broom in that area. So I think we just need to have a really good plan around that. And then the last one is just the commercial objectives of the resource. So forestry is obviously a key part of it. how we give effect to the commercial operations within that, to ensure that it fits in with, all the other aspects of how we want to manage this resource around, biodiversity, user groups and Marcus Roy made a point around when the forestry is taken down, there is a bit of work that needs done to repatriate the tracks, and those sorts of things. So, and explore other commercial opportunities that may be available for the resource as well. So that's my summary. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. There's a couple of points I'd like to follow up on. Firstly, the forestry has to be a very managed process, because there are a couple of things that we need to bear in mind with commercial forestry at Sandy Point. One is it's very sandy, so the trees can't get huge or they blow over on people, and that's never a good look. But also when it comes time to harvest, that there is a bit of pain that goes with that. Firstly, the disruption that comes from the harvesting process and the area being inaccessible for a period of time, and then it has to be repatriated, and then of course takes a while for new trees to grow back. So there is that timing difference, but I think they're really valid points for what sits in with the management plan. The other is around the status of a user group. I think a user group is a really good liaison vehicle, but ultimately all user groups need to realise that actually the decisions rest here, and the user group is a vehicle through which they can provide feedback to council, but council ultimately determines the direction. But I agree, I think it's a good thing. Sorry, Grant?
Yeah, so just on that, look, there will be example stuff where other similar resources around the country, there will be, very effective user groups, that are working well with councils, and so there'll be a model there. There'll be equally examples probably of user groups that aren't probably as effective. And look, we have some quasi sort of groups, if you think of Maui and equally Bluff Hill, maybe it's less informal, but I think there's really strong engagement between council and, with Bluff Hill mountain biking, with Mana Whenua, with biodiversity around management of pests and that resource. So we've just got to try and find the best outcome for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the benefit of a user group is you've got a good representation of the diverse range of users who have an express interest in that area. And their value comes and goes depending on who fills the seats and what's going on. But absolutely, it's a really good vehicle to have.
Yeah.
Cool. Councillors,
Thank you.
any other feedback from the deliberation process that you want? Steve?
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Dermody made a really good summary on the hearings for me, so I echo a lot of what he said. Yeah, I just think understanding you're working with so many different stakeholders with different interests, and a lot of them conflict directly when it comes to some of those recreation activities. So I definitely think designated areas is crucial, but also understanding the differences, but also synergies between some of them, and I guess working alongside to find some of those synergies, because even, Alberti Sands brought up off-leash dog walking, that potentially conflicts with disc golf, and we talked to the disc golf community as well, so there's conflicts across the board. But is there an opportunity to find synergy between an eco-sanctuary and horse riding, for example? So I think that's the dance, I guess, is acknowledging conflicts, but also looking to find some synergies between the groups out there, and hopefully empowering lots of opportunities.
Thanks. Tom?
I think, while we could probably spend some time talking about Coopers Creek specifically, I don't know why you intend to do that, Chair. You've already asked a question of Rex. There was one matter that was raised that I don't think we actually have addressed at all. In fact, I go so far as to say I don't quite know where we landed with it through the kind of 1 year process that Rex described, and that was the fact that was mentioned by Catherine Bryan McDonough, that the previously in the management plans that there was an option for council to acquire cribs. That seems to have been deleted through the latest version. I just wonder whether that's something that Rex can provide some clarification of, because it's a specific point that was made by the submitter, which I don't think we've ever responded to.
Thanks. Rex?
So what was the questioning? It was around purchasing, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
The ability of council to acquire.
Yeah, so again, I think that got raised on that 27th September conversation and was discussed as part of getting to the resolution that the council ultimately got to. Because again, I think from memory, the original recommendation was around a 35-year licence to occupy, and after conversation, council changed that recommendation to 21 plus 7 plus 7. Similarly, Councillor Campbell, that was around the purchase of, it was included in that report from memory, and there was some dissension from memory with regards to what would that mean is a slow sinking lid type approach to the village, and what would that mean from an ongoing viability perspective. So all that has gone in the reserve management plan draft, as you see, as has been out for consultation and has been seen, is the resolution that was passed specifically to be included in the reserve management plan, which is what we're talking about today.
I think, though, I mean, without wanting to spend a whole lot of time on it, the question that was raised by Catherine Bryan was about the deletion of the ability of council to acquire cribs, and I don't know that we ever explicitly discussed that at any point through September. I mean, I just wonder whether that's worth another look and see whether we consciously missed it out or whether we've just missed it out. Because I don't recall it being something that we consciously determined.
So that's why it's not in the reserve management plan?
We didn't determine it.
Yeah.
So we can we go back and check that
It was in the
wasn't
previous one and it's been deleted. That's the point that is being made by the submitter, and I don't know that I can really remember any reason why we deleted it, so I think it's worth just looking again at it.
It was the changes have been simply to make to follow exactly what was decided on the meeting on the 27th of September. So that was the only reason it's no longer in there, because it wasn't specific to the resolution that came from that meeting. And so we don't just roll over the management plan, we actually developed it based on the information that we had
No,
at
but
that time.
I think a change like that should probably be conscious rather than just a, omission. So, I mean, my suggestion, Chair, was that question is just looked at again. It might be that we come up with the same answer, but I just don't recall it being. The fact that we never discussed it in September was probably an error, omission rather than commission. I don't know that we consciously decided to delete that option.
Can't recall. I think we'll need to check. It may have been, because there's something sitting in the back of my head. Leslie,
Thanks, Mr Chair. I was going to say it's a fair point, and I think we had better check it actually, because if it was an omission, I certainly don't remember it was a decision to take it out. If it was an omission, it's probably a fair point for us to go back and recheck it and decide.
so if there's any
whether or not-
change to that would be revisiting that process rather than this one. That decision rather than the management plan process.
I think that would be the fair way to do it, yes.
Thanks. So we'll see if we can get some clarification on it.
I'm sorry, I'm slightly confused as to what you're asking.
As to whether or not through that process we discussed it.
And
But you may have
consciously
discussed it,
decided
but
to
you didn't make a decision. So I'm just trying to, do you want us to include an option for it to be included back in the reserve management plan as a result of these deliberations and as a result of consideration of the submissions to be, because remember that the reserve management plan that we have in front of us now is still in draft, and it's still in draft until council makes its decision in May. So I've got no problem us revisiting it and bringing that back as an option from the deliberations, from the deliberations and panel or hearings panel, and as per those deliberations, to then incorporate that as an option to be revisited or reinstituted in the draft for the community so that could be a recommendation to the Community Wellbeing Committee that then goes up to council to answer Councillor Campbell's point and Councillor Soper's point. If you want it to be reconsidered, I think that's a way of doing it.
Okay.
But I know Councillor Crackett's got some.
Yep.
Yeah,
Alex?
just on this topic, sorry, is there anything, like, does it need to be specifically stated in a decision? Like, there would be nothing precluding us at the moment from purchasing the cribs back regardless anyway. Is that not correct? So
In
why is it, Councillor Campbell?
Well, that's
that-
In
probably...
the previous 10-year plans, there's been an option for council, explicit for
Yeah.
council to purchase them. For some reason, it's missing from the latest one.
but
I must admit, I never noticed that at the time, so it's been raised by a submitter.
Yeah,
So I think it's appropriate for us, to consider whether it was intentionally omitted or whether
Yeah.
we should bring it back in. That's no different than any other submission that we're considering.
yeah, for sure. I just wondered whether there wouldn't be anything to preclude us from purchasing them back at any point within the process. Whether or not it needed to be explicitly stated is just
It
seems
would
to
be, it would be good if there was direction. Leslie?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I think the point the submitter's making is the fact that it is now missing would appear to give the signal that council would no longer see a willing seller, willing buyer scenario, and that they're asking us to reconsider the possibility that it is still in there,
included.
which I do think is fair enough, and Rex has made a reasonable suggestion as to how we could get that to the next stage.
Rex?
Through Mr Chair again. So I've just, through Cassie, thank you, and Caroline, just identified, just confirming this is the clause, Councillor Campbell. The current reserve management plan, it is 3.7 to phase out non-conforming residential and holiday houses over a period of time by a process of gradual attrition or acquisition of the properties. So an option we can include, I'm looking here, is we can include that as an option to be brought back into the current draft for consideration at the Community Wellbeing and Regulatory, as well as then if that got recommended through to Council at its May meeting and then that would be adopted into the Reserve Management Plan as a clause like it has been, I think, as Councillor Campbell's point.
Comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than anything else we're considering here, surely.
So that-
And I'm doing it by consensus. Is there anyone who's not comfortable with that going forward as a recommendation, essentially reinstituting something?
And all I want to do, just to confirm, so that we're clear from a staff perspective, is that you want those exact words that I read out, to phase out non-conforming residential and holiday houses over a period of time by a process of gradual attrition or acquisition of the properties.
I think you're taking it a stage further than probably...
But that's what's there currently.
Yeah, it is.
Or-
Intent.
That's what we've already made a decision on.
Yeah.
Well, that's
It's
what
been
I've
ra-
asked.
The point is, it's been raised by a submitter. It is now absent from the management plan. I think it's a sin of omission rather than commission. I don't think we decided to take it out. So the question that's being asked is whether to look at whether it's appropriate to bring it back in. And I think, by whatever process appropriate, to bring back to council a recommendation one way or the other.
So the question was, are you comfortable with the previous wording coming back as a recommendation from this committee?
As I say, well, I just think that goes a bit too far. I would like to understand how it
Well,
interacts
it's either the way it was, or you're diddling with it.
Okay.
So I'll go to Trish and then Alex.
Thank you. Non-conforming was a comment that 2 or 3 of the submitters had issues with, and in that submission currently that piece that Rex currently read out, it talked about non-conforming. Is that necessary? They do have a licence to be there. what does the term non-conforming, and it did seem to be, they had some concern that they weren't doing the right thing. And I
They
wonder
might
whether
not be.
that's necessary.
They might not be. That's why the previous clause existed. If there was something that was done that didn't conform to building standards, what would the expectation around that be if, say, they were in Grassmere? That they should rectify to ensure that it conformed? No?
I just think, myself only, that there's an inference there that they are non-conforming, and for the majority they may be. I don't know a way around it, but there were 3 people who actually objected to the term.
So you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I understand that.
You either want to recommend through to community wellbeing and regulatory that we put the old clause back in, which includes that non-conforming, or we remain silent on it, which is where we're at currently. Alex, thanks for waiting.
Thank you. I think because the reserve management plan conversation and the decisions that we've already made on that, I think we're sort of running a wee little bit of a risk here that we're just relitigating something that we've already made a decision on. That's not necessarily what we are here to discuss today around the Sandy Point Domain Management Plan.
It is, kinda, in that we're not talking about the leases specifically, but something that existed in the previous management plan. So there was a suggestion that we bring back a previous clause. And that's the point we're discussing now, because it was raised during a submission. Do you want the previous clause brought back or not? Because it comes with a fish hook.
Yeah.
Personally, I would suggest that being silent on it still leaves the opportunity for it to happen, because as you said earlier, is there anything that would preclude us from doing that? No. But it leaves out that whole non-conforming issue. Leslie?
Thanks, Mr Chair. Can Rex just read out the wording again?
One moment.
Sorry, I'm just getting it back up on the screen. So to phase out non-conforming residential and holiday houses over a period of time by a process of gradual attrition or acquisition of the properties.
Is it possible to restore the clause without the word non-conforming there?
Excuse me, Leslie, could you read?
Is
If that's the
it
wish of
pos-
this,
is it
if that's the
possible-
wish of the direction that you give us, absolutely possible.
Mr Morris, that would be consistent for us to suggest that?
That's what you're deliberating.
And that would give the signal that council
Maybe
might
just
be a
require-
willing buyer if there was a willing seller.
Yes.
Doesn't commit.
Doesn't give a commitment, but it restores the possibility, the signal is then restored without the non-conforming word, which has, as has been pointed out, was raised by submitters as being problematic.
Yeah, it does that, councillor, and it also removes the problematic word that the submitters were concerned about, but it also makes it explicit rather than implicit, which is always an advantage when you're looking at a management plan.
So
I would suggest therefore that we look at doing that, Chair.
the word we're removing
Is non-conforming.
Non-conforming.
is non-conforming.
Non-conforming. The remainder stands that, through you, Chair, implies that
The signal's there.
it signals that we will consider acquiring said properly, and it effectively gives a closing lid.
Grant?
Yeah, just a point of clarification on that. Do we need to define acquisition by council?
Not sure
Yes,
who
thank
else
you.
it would be.
Yeah, well, but for point of clarity, because acquisition could be open, couldn't it? And they may presume that it's for acquisition by other parties.
Okay.
Unless it specifically state acquisition by council.
Okay. Rex?
Again, we can include that. I'm really conscious here that you're starting to jump around which contradicts some of your previous decisions and the purpose of the previous decisions. And I've got to be perfectly honest here. If I was a resident of Coopers Creek and that was included in the reserve management plan, it actually is less security for me than what the 21 plus 7 provides. Because that is actually explicitly saying that council can come in and do that, whereas if it's silent on it, you don't have that option necessarily. So I actually think it's worse for the people of Coopers Creek, but that's if we will take your direction.
Alex?
Through you, Chair, thank you. That, Rex has kind of hit the nail on the head there. That's kind of my point, in that if we are explicit about saying that we have intent to acquire it, it provides less security than what we've already made decisions around this table for Coopers Creek on. If I was them, I would be nervous with us including this.
So I sit in the camp of, I think silence around the issue provides more options, but
Well, that's,
let's see where we sit. Indicatively, who would support the inclusion of that in what we're recommending through to community wellbeing?
I've lost track of what we're actually including, because we went off talking about, first we talked about the word acquiring, then we talked about the word non-conforming. So I'm not sure what's proposed now.
What Leslie
Well, the
just-
whole issue was around acquiring.
Yeah.
No, non-conforming was raised separately by
Yes,
Trish.
yes. Well, it's part of the original, what was in the previous or current management plan. And so the proposal now is
Take out
either
non-conforming.
silent or we support acquiring. the rest-
So just my summary of how we've got to where we've got to. It was raised was it the intent or non-intent to delete this clause out of the current draft as a result of 3 submissions which raised the idea of non-conforming. We then looked at what the clause was that has been deleted and being now considered to be put back in. And with a bit of editing, because based on what I'm hearing here, if it was to be put back in, what you would be saying would be to phase out residential and holiday houses over a period of time by a process of gradual attrition or acquisition of the properties by council.
So you're either supporting the inclusion of that or not. Not as silent, doesn't preclude it, but whether you want to have that in the management plan, that's the question. So indicatively, who supports the inclusion of it? I'll take a show of hands. 1, 2, 3. No, not at this point. Thanks for that. Good point, though. And I think it's useful for us to recognise through the process that the issue was raised and that it's our feeling that the proposed draft management plan doesn't preclude it from happening, but is in keeping with the decision which we made in September, which still allows for it to happen. So we're not stopping it from happening. We recognise that it's no longer part of, or not recommended to be part of the reserve management plan expressly. Any issues around clarity? No? Okay. Pania.
I just want to sort of really just touch on there was a couple of other things that were raised around pest control for certain areas and things like that, and what that would look like, and actually understanding that a bit better, because there's quite a lot of multi-users out there already. So cutting off another piece, might be interesting, but that was just one thing for discussion. The other thing was really...
Sorry, we'll just do them one issue at a time. Pest control, what are you wanting?
Yeah, so it was raised God, in one of the submissions I was reading a bit about it. Yeah, and that they wanted to fence some areas off for pest control so that they could get rid of them, I suppose. But I'm not quite sure what that looks like, so that's why I wrote it down. So
There
could
will
someone
be a
explain
pest
more?
management plan that sits separately to the reserve management plan. And I guess one of the things with pests is that's exactly what they are, and they too tend to move. Let's use rabbits as an example.
Rats and cats and...
Yep. So there is an active management plan that sits separately around pest control. Thank you.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to raise was around horse riders, and the reason for this is because they are really restricted on places that they can actually ride as a horse rider themselves. That was probably one of the main areas that we used to go out to. And I mean, there's like for mountain bikes and and dog walkers, there's lots of other types of areas. But for horse riders themselves, I just want to bring to your attention, it's really limited. So just for something else to consider.
Yep, but at the same time, it's a
Yeah.
multi-use area. So that
It's a
whilst there
multi-use
are
area.
specific areas that
Absolutely.
are set aside, and I think we had feedback through the submissions process that there were other people
Yeah.
moving into those areas as well.
Yeah, and I actually did like the suggestion that was in one of the ones around colour-coded tracks. I thought, visual.
As long as people understand what the code means.
I know.
I've
But
watched
I'm
people
just saying,
sail
you
through
know,
red lights.
When we're thinking about signage around having minimal text, using graphics, maybe there's an opportunity to use a spice of colour.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Pania. Ria?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just wanted to bring up the point 12 of the submission from the mountain biking group, and where they looked at our draft management plan with the policy 8.11.2, which, along with other submitters, support the intent of that policy, but they wanted us to go deeper into looking how the conflict, and Steve has touched on this briefly as well, could be managed between the horses, the cyclists and the dogs. And with the horse lady, Julie, that was here on behalf of the, I think it might have been, can't remember her name, but Judy. Julie talked about, after being prompted, about how horses needed more areas, but when they coexisted with surprise dogs or cyclists, that it became a health and safety risk that the horse would bolt, potentially the rider would be injured. So I just wondered, with a few submitters that support that policy, and actually tightening that up to designated areas, obviously keeping environmental concerns still safe, if that's something we could look further into. How do we make sure they all coexist together with less conflict? And then as a health and safety area would be in areas where four-wheel drive are ripping up the dirt, being unsafe around people, how to manage that in terms of safety as well for those types of vehicles being used as a joyride, ripping up through the park and scaring its users.
So there's a couple of issues to unpack there. One is what's the magic bullet? Because I'm not sure that we're going to arrive at an answer for that. I mean, you can put signage in place and there is a hope that people will abide by it. On the four-wheel driving issue, you're talking about the vandalism. Well, it's illegal.
Well, we know that, but some people clearly don't. So, like, what can we do to put, I mean, is it the same thing, signage or a warning
It's a
or
police matter, as Grant said before, that,
CCTV.
you know, is there a CCTV, but exactly where do you do it, and the Wi-Fi out there is shocking, if not non-existent in
For some
places,
users.
and virtually no lighting, so I'm not, I think they're points that we're all aware of, and we'll look to see how we resolve. Maybe some of it comes into that discussion at council around the process of a ranger. Some of it is liaison with police. But it's hard to pick when those people are around doing that. So we can note that, and if there's some magic ticket that arrives, that'd be awesome. Or at least partial and gradually get behaviour change and making people aware of what the damage does. And part of that is people come and ask for stuff to be happening with reserves, and we go, no, we can't, because, sorry, we have to keep doing restitution for pieces of land that's being torn up by people in four-wheel drives.
Okay, but I do know that, I mean, all of the submitters have put forward some really good ideas that are workable, and one of them, I just, on our document, page 15, I think it's meant to read Oreti San users, but it says Oreti Links Group. Are they a separate group, or are they one and the same? Do we know?
Cassie?
They're the same. One of the actions is just to actually work with all of the users within that space to look at a good name for that area.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was already Links Golf Course,
Yes.
but already Sands has come through the conversations. So they are the same.
Yeah, great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Grant, was that on the same matter or another one?
Yeah, same matter. Look, I just think in terms of the user groups, that's why we need them to, define their priorities, but equally acknowledge compromise. They're not going to have it all for themselves. That's not the nature of the resource and not its purpose. So I think we've got to work through with them, and, through that process, you'll resolve some of the issues that Councillor Bonds raised. And that's the only way they've got to define that. I don't think we want to be involved in defining that for them, because I think that's got a whole lot of sort of overreach in it. So I think we've got to really engage with those user groups to, define their priorities and acknowledge the compromise that's required to make it work for them.
Thanks, Grant. Alex, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. I just wanted a question probably for Parks. Do you know if the Otatara pest land control group and the pest busters or something, I think they call themselves, do they extend their, because I know they do work on our reserves, pest control on our reserves in Otatara, but do they do it that stretch so far out to the whole Sandy Point domain?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Crockett. Unfortunately, they don't extend out into the Sandy Point domain as yet.
As yet?
Yeah.
So that
We
is
would
something
love to work with them to extend their reach.
we can work with them to extend their reach. Excellent, thank you. And just while I've got the microphone, thank you, Chair, I just really wanted to support the idea of the volunteers and the warden type dynamic. I think, and the point has been raised whether or not, or what powers they would have or be given. Often it can actually just be a presence and surveillance that's the deterrent for people for vandalism purposes or whatever they are doing out there. I don't even know. I think the presence of just surveillance in general is often enough to deter. So, they may not need significant powers, and whether or not we have the ability to give them significant powers anyway is probably yet up for discussion. Thank you.
I don't think we'd be reinventing the wheel.
No.
Exactly.
I think those definitions will exist elsewhere and from roles we've had previously. Obviously, the ranger role existed previously, and look at how volunteer roles are defined elsewhere. Ria.
Just one final area for me was the, I'm just trying to remember which submitter it was. A couple of submitters put forward about the low moat issue, the bailage, and also the gorse and broom. I'm just wondering, for the safety in our way, Sandy Point Way, when they're walking their dogs or they're riding their horses or walking their humans or going for a walk, is there a regular, or will there be a regular maintenance of the gorse and the broom and all those problematic areas? Is that a regular plan that is put together, or?
So that's two things, Ria: low mow and pest management,
Yes.
which is not just animal pests. So yes, there is a plan for that. Low mow. My recollection was we actually started the concept of low mow was actually originally only at Sandy Point, and looking at the sports fields out there that are used for winter sports,
Yes.
not used over the summer, and why should we be mowing them every week? I don't think they get to the point where they're turning into some gently swaying savanna over the summer months. but they probably also don't need to be a golf course from November through to March either. I'm not aware that there's been an issue on the playing fields themselves. Around other areas, people have had various opinions on the former golf course site. So does that kind of answer your question, councillor?
Yes
So
and,
the
yes
the
and
pest
no.
management plan will look at spread of gorse and broom.
Yeah, so to manage that and to, I mean, I know it takes a bit of time to get rid of that, nevertheless it's still...
Time and resource.
Yes.
So sometimes there might not be any money left.
Okay.
Just saying, that's the process that we go through, and that's why we talk about levels of service.
Thank you.
But at the same time, it's also something you don't want to let get
Get out
away
of
on
control, yeah.
you. And I guess sometimes there are,
But then where's the marker, at what stage is it considered as out of control? It's not up to us, but yes.
Pania.
Mine was just really touching on the low mode, because that really came through quite strongly for me. And just around really, I understand with the, you know, the fields out there, because they're seasonal, but I'm looking more at the playgrounds and the other types of areas that are shared spaces and used a lot more regularly. Do we have a plan around those types of areas in the summer through to the spring and things like that, that are mowed more on a regular basis than the rest?
So the question is does it the whole area become a low mow over summer or not? No, it doesn't. So some parts are maintained more regularly.
But that's what I assumed, but that's not what's coming through the submissions.
Depends on what parts people
Yeah.
want. And there'll be a visual difference as well, because they'll see slightly longer grass on the football fields, for example. Not the ones right next to the river, but the ones further back. Caroline?
Oh, if I may, I'd really like to just provide a little point of clarity around the ranger service. We haven't had a resident ranger at Sandy Point Domain since 2018, but we do still have a permanent ranger workforce who are active in Sandy Point on a daily basis during the work hours. So we're probably about 16 hours of resource in there every single day, but they're no longer resident. That's been the main point of difference since that time. Just thought if any of my team were listening in, they might be a little bit concerned that they're no longer out there, and they genuinely are.
But I think that was the point that was made by submitters. There's a perception if there is a resident that is
Yeah.
a discouragement. But that's an issue for council as a whole, not necessarily through this process. Rex?
Well, just on that, to add to that about being a resident, I understand council sold the house and it's been relocated as well in 2018.
That's a hiccup.
Yep.
Hadn't noticed. Alex and then Leslie.
Thank you. I mean, I suppose the in residence piece is quite interesting because I think it is really important to acknowledge that the residents of Coopers Creek that are out there at the moment do play a kaitiaki role out there as well, and that was really clear through the submissions, but again, I digress. One of the submitters around, I believe it's the horse group, horse track users group, has got some funding there to be able to work with our team to get some new signage up. Is that something we're enabling to happen? Is that something we're working with them on? And do the other user groups, because it's come through quite clearly in the submissions that, you know, designated signage or coloured signage to that point, you know, sort of clarifying areas a bit more. You know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make a drink, so there might be some crossover of use there, but if you're
That wasn't funny.
if you're
So two parts to that, councillor. I think the first one was frantic nodding. Yes, we would work with them if they were prepared to.
We are.
They are working with those groups that are prepared to chip in. And your second was, can we ask others if they are prepared to contribute?
That was the, yes, that was the
And
second
that would
part
get
of the
that'd get a
question,
fat yes too.
Excellent.
Leslie.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the ranger issue, my memory of the submissions is that a couple of the submissions at least referred to a couple of visits per day by rangers. So it seems that the non-residential status was a bit of the issue and the signal that gave. So I don't remember any submitter saying that there was no longer any sort of ranger service out there. It was more that it was now intermittent, couple of times a day. And
Well,
that's
it depends
why I
on
was
where you
keen to
are,
have
I
it.
guess.
That's why I was keen to have it.
Yeah. So if
highlighted.
there's 16 hours of coverage on average per day happening out there, it's a big piece of land, and they might not necessarily always be seen.
And it might mean that people who are there perceived it as a couple of visits a day, and it may be more often, but it seemed to me that the permanency or the residential status was the key.
Yeah, and that's going to be an issue for council as a whole to
Exactly.
debate around the cost of having a permanent resident and put a house back.
Yeah, and it was noted in at least one submission that the house had been removed, so I don't think we were in any doubt about that.
Trish?
It just occurred to me, it may be possible on the ranger issue to have some signage to say that they patrol the area irregularly or regularly, so that people are aware. Because it seems to me it's also lack of knowledge of some people that they don't. I'm not
Just keep
sure.
thinking it's going to be a lot of signs.
Yeah, okay,
Here's a book before you enter Sandy Point.
yeah.
Rare.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just further to the ranger topic, thank you for clarifying, so for people that are watching this, I'll actually hear what you said, Caroline. I'm wondering, and could it be a consideration that the people who currently look after the area through the business hours, that there could be some sort of roster made? A lot of the vandalism, or some of it has been indicated, happens after hours, so is there something we can do to, 16 hours spread it out so that there's at least a night time?
So there becomes a health and safety issue during some of those times where you couldn't have somebody out there by themselves.
Yeah.
And that's sadly the period of time where I think most of the damage happens.
Okay.
But that's
That's
a wider issue we can work with police to resolve, because it's sporadic by my observation, and so as soon as it starts, the opportunity to try and leap on it and discourage it from
Festering.
escalating before it skids off the rails.
Okay. That's it for
Any
me.
additional feedback, councillors?
The visitor centre?
Sorry?
The visitor centre?
Well, that was the house.
Was the house and the visit, I thought, is the house, it wasn't, it was two different things, right? Because
Visitor
I
centre's
think
still
5
there.
of our submitters.
Visitor centre's still there.
Okay. That's solved.
Questions or comments? The super encouraging thing is that the feedback and discussion that we've had through this process really reflects the fact that we've read and heard the submissions. Some of the matters are things that can be dealt with outside of the process. The things that can be dealt with inside of the process, I think, are already recognised in the responses. But I'm super impressed with the level of consideration that you've applied to the submissions. In fact, it's probably been a greater response to the submissions to this than a lot of the other processes that we go through as far as management plans. And so that's really encouraging. But I think it also reflects the significance of the area to the city and how it's valued, and how we value it and the users and the residents and the role that they play, and our concern over misuse and its various forms, and the safety and use challenges, and how we can help define those areas that for safety's purpose are more exclusive use. And I'll use the example of Teretonga because I go there more than any other place in the city. And you obviously don't just go wandering out on your mountain bike across the track during a race meeting. it's generally noisy enough that it's an easy mistake to avoid, but probably less so for somebody riding their bike or horse along a mixed-use track, and particularly if you're on a mountain bike and you're going hell for leather, because you've got a good run on, and then you realise that there's a horse coming the other way. It's just to be more considerate of those mixed-use areas, but how we can address that through signage is, and simple signage is, I think, the challenge that faces us. So thank you for that. Can I ask, Cassie, do you think you've got sufficient direction? And Caroline and Chris, are you comfortable with where we're at going forward to what we take onto the Community Wellbeing and Regulatory Committee?
One of the things that was discussed last week and also in the submissions came through around the proposal to undertake vehicle closure, road closures or road restrictions.
Yes.
Something we'd really appreciate your direction on.
Was that the looped
Thank
sealed
you.
road?
So there was resistance to some of those roads being closed off at certain points of time, particularly from the residents in that area. I'm comfortable with them remaining open. I understand the reason why closing off was considered, but it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other scenario, and trying to make sure that vandalism is reduced and that people are safe versus being able to get into and get out of easily and quickly if needed. And that's the thing that really sits with me. If somebody needs to get out in a hurry to get to A&E, or there's a fire appliance heading out there, you don't want to be messing around with a gate. So is there general support for those roads remaining open?
Yep.
Yes.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. So that moves to,
Grant's still got his hand
oh
up.
sorry, Grant, my apologies. Mike, mate?
Sorry, just for that, I think that falls into that, the safety and security piece that we need the management team to come back to us with a really strong sense on that. I agree with your thinking, however, I think it's something that they need to think about more deeply and come back with options around that.
Well, the option that we've just given is take the gates out. I think it's the direction we were providing based on the submissions. So, two recommendations there. Received the report and confirmed the feedback. Just give me a minute, Trish.
Sorry.
Which is essentially what we've gone through this morning. I won't make it specific, but you have a chance to clarify when it comes back to community wellbeing and regulatory. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Trish, sorry.
Sorry, I'll move them both.
Thank you. Seconder? Pania, thanks. Any further discussion on it? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much for your participation. Really appreciate it. Steve, there you go, 7 minutes.
Great, thank you, Chair.
That wasn't wise. It's just an
Thank you.
observation. Thanks, Grant. We'll see you shortly.